Hello and welcome to this presentation for A-Level Business Theme 3. This one is on decision trees. You need to be able to construct simple decision tree diagrams. You need to be able to calculate and interpret the figures generated by the diagrams, and you need to be able to explain the limitations of using decision trees. So businesses have to make decisions all the time. Usually, because many businesses are profit maximizers, they will choose the option that they believe is going to generate them the best return. Let's take a look at an example. The manager of an events organizing business has to decide between holding the event outside and holding the event indoors. So he's going to be thinking about what the financial returns are of the two options, holding the event indoors and outdoors. But the trouble is, the returns that the event will generate depend not only on whether he holds indoors or outdoors, but also on the weather. So how can he decide where to hold the event? Well, using the information here, the events manager can draw up a decision tree, and that will help him to choose the event that should generate the highest return, taking into account the probabilities of all the different events occurring. So what we've got here is some important information. So if he holds the event indoors and the weather is fine, then the return that the event will generate is £5,000. But if he holds the event indoors and the weather is poor, he will make more, £7,000. More people might want to attend because it's a rainy day and they want to go to an indoor event. If he holds the event outdoors and the weather is fine, however, he will make more, as I'm sure you'd expect. And if the weather is poor and he holds the event outdoors, he will only make a return of £4,000. So how is he going to decide what to do? Well, he's got to take into account not only these potential returns that the event might generate, but also the probability of them occurring. So he's going to look at past weather records, and according to past weather records, there is a 60% chance of the weather being fine and a 40% chance of the weather being poor. So that information is going to be useful, and I'll show you how to use that in a minute. And the last piece of information he needs is how much the events will actually cost. So if he hosts the event indoors, the cost will be £2,000 to arrange it, and if he hosts the event outdoors, the cost will be £3,000. So let's see how we can use that information now and draw up a decision tree to help our manager decide on the best option. First, we need to start by drawing a decision node to show that a decision needs to be made, and these are square. Then we draw lines coming out of the decision node to show the choices available. So here we've got one choice, hold the event indoors, we've got another choice, hold the event outdoors, and we've got a third option always open to us, which is to do nothing. And where there are costs associated with the choices, we write these under the line. And these are usually written in brackets to show that they're costs. The next thing that we need to do is add a chance node to show that the outcome of the decision is not certain. So these are our chance nodes, and these are always circular. Then we draw lines coming out of the chance nodes to show the chance of an event occurring. In this case, the weather being fine or poor. Under each chance event, we write the probability of it happening, and we write that as a decimal. So the chance of the weather being fine was 60%, as a decimal 0.6, and the chance of the weather being poor 40%, or a decimal 0.4. And these must always sum to 1. So 0.6 add 0.4 equals 1. And lastly, at the end of the branch, we write the estimated financial return that the business will earn if the event happens. Okay, so if they hold the event indoors and the weather's fine, the business will make £5,000. So we write that there. If we hold the event indoors and the weather is poor, we'll make £7,000. We'll write that there, and so on. And these can be positive or negative. Sometimes an outcome will generate a loss, in which case that figure would be negative. Once we've drawn the decision tree, we can work out the expected value, sometimes called the expected monetary value, of each option that the business is considering. So in your notes, make sure that you have sketched an example of a decision tree and that you've labelled everything up so that you've got a really good example to help you when you come to do your own in class. So the square nodes are decision nodes and the round nodes are chance nodes. So maybe pause the video for a minute and just record this example down into your notes. So you needed to be able to construct a simple decision tree diagram. Hopefully you now understand how those are constructed. Now we'll look at how you can actually use the figures from the decision tree, do some calculations and interpret those calculations. So there's the information that we had, and we use that to construct our decision tree. So what we want to do first is work out the expected value of one of the events. So let's take the option of holding this event indoors. So what is the expected value of the indoor event? Well, if the weather is fine, we'll generate a return of £5,000, but there's only a 60% chance of that occurring. So what we do is we take the return and we multiply that by the probability of it occurring, and that gives us the expected value of £3,000. Then we do the same, but this time we look at what will happen if the weather is poor. If the weather is poor and we hold the event indoors, then we will generate a return of £7,000. But there's only a 0.4 chance or a 40% chance of that occurring. So we times those together to get the expected value of 2,800. And what we have to do next is we sum these together to get the total expected value of that option. So the expected value of the return of that option is 5,800. Now that doesn't mean that if we hold the event indoors we will get £5,800. We'll either get £5,000 or £7,000. But if we were to hold this event hundreds of times on the same day of the year, then on average that's what we would make. So that's really what this figure means. But that's not the end. We've got to take off the cost of that event occurring. So that's our next step, and that will enable us to calculate the net gain of holding the indoor event. So expected value equals 5,800, so we just write that up here. The cost of the event indoors is £2,000. We subtract that from the expected value, and that gives us the net gain, which is a bit like profit, 3,800. So that's us finished with the indoor event, and now we do the same for the outdoor event. Expected value equals the estimated return times the probability of it occurring. Do that for both of these different potential outcomes and get the expected value of that event. Again, work out the net gain of the event by subtracting the cost of the event from the expected value, and then you can compare these two net gains and decide which option is the best one to go for. And I'm sure you can see in this case that the best option for the manager is to hold the event outside, because the net gain of that option is £800 higher than the net gain that he could generate if he held the event indoors. And it's best to write your working out really neatly like that. Get in the habit of writing out in the same way each time, and then it will be very straightforward for you when you have to do it in the exam. So the next step is to look at the decision tree again, and what we do is we just cross off the events that we've rejected. So that option of holding the event indoor has been rejected. We're not going to do nothing because there is a positive net gain of holding the event outdoors. So that's the best choice that we can make, so we don't cross off that branch. Okay, so just something for your notes. Could you please make sure you write down what the decision tree is? So it is a mathematical model used to help managers make decisions. It uses estimated returns and also estimated probabilities to calculate likely outcomes. And that helps us to decide whether the net gain from a decision is worthwhile, either because it's positive, because it's high enough, or because it compares favourably with another option. So pause the video and make sure you write those down, and then I'll give you some key terms that you need for decision trees as well. So the key terms that you need are 1. Probability, and that is simply the chance of an outcome occurring, and that will be expressed as a percentage or a decimal, and you'll need to use it as a decimal in your calculations. The expected value, This is the anticipated value of an investment, and it's calculated by multiplying each of the possible outcomes or returns by the likelihood of each outcome or return occurring, and then summing all of those, adding all of those values up to get the expected value of one choice. And then the net gain. And to get the net gain, it's simply calculated by deducting the cost of an investment from its expected value. So make sure you've written those down, please. So now you should be able to construct a simple decision tree and calculate and interpret the figures. And now we'll take a look at the limitations, the pros and cons of using decision trees. So let's start by taking a look at the advantages. Well, one benefit of using decision trees is that they actually force managers to carefully consider options, look at the outcomes, and look at the chance or the probability of them occurring. So it encourages a very methodical approach to decision making. The other benefit is because they actually do include the probability of events occurring in the decision making process, then it could be argued that they're actually a more useful technique than investment appraisal techniques that you've already learnt about. Investment appraisal techniques assume that these returns are actually going to be generated, but they don't necessarily look at, well, what are the chances of them occurring? And lastly, because you look at best case and worst case scenarios using the probabilities, then if the worst case scenario is a very bad outcome for the business, then it's really important to know this, and businesses are not likely to take a decision where there's a chance that their very survival could be threatened. You need to know that information in advance before making a decision. Now let's look at the limitations. Well, the most important one, I think, is that decision trees are only as useful as the data that is included within them. How accurate are the probabilities? How accurate are the estimated outcomes? If these are very accurate, then of course the decision tree is very helpful, but they might not always be that accurate. And this means that decision trees can be particularly problematic with one-off or first-time decisions. If you've made a decision lots and lots and lots of times, then you'll have good data on probabilities and outcomes. But if it's the first time, of course you'll have done your research, but your data might not be that reliable. It's also really important to be aware of the risk of management bias. Perhaps outcomes and probabilities are being overstated because the manager is in favour of a certain decision. It's worth bearing in mind as well that decision trees only look at the quantitative data that is involved in a decision. They don't consider all the qualitative factors that you know would be important in decision making. And lastly, they're not dynamic. It takes time to collect the data, analyse it, discuss it and make a decision. And in very dynamic markets, it's possible that the data might even be out of date before you've managed to make a decision. So please make sure you've got those down in your notes. So what you needed to be able to do was construct a simple decision tree diagram, calculate and interpret the figures generated by the diagrams, and explain the limitations of using decision trees. Hopefully you're confident with those things now. Please make sure you write down any questions that you've got, and you can ask those when you come to class. Thank you very much for listening.